Again, thank you so much for everybody who's attending today. I'm here with Matt Baum from Procore. We're going to talk a little bit about how do you leverage schedule data to control project outcomes. And now, to me, that's project controls. But yeah, we've both spent a lot of time in the industry understanding, various ways to take data and make good use of that data. I work at SmartPM, CEO there. Matt is the product manager for Procore. But a little bit about myself, if you don't already know, I spent 20 years analysis. Excuse me?
I think for some reason.
Matt, I think you're muted now.
I think you were muted for part of that intro, Mike. But I can keep rolling for the sake of time.
Okay.
Yeah, my name is Matt Baum. I'm a product manager here at Procore. I work on our schedule tool and daily log and a few other things. Been here about 7 years, so that's I don't have nearly as much experience as Mike and expertise, but learned a lot about schedule and project management, project controls as I've been here. So excited to talk about schedule and dig in.
All right. Yeah, I worked as a consultant for many years, doing all sorts of analytics, whether it was cost-based, resource-based, schedule-based. Found a lot of value in the schedule data itself. But yeah, now I work at SmartPM. I'm the CEO of SmartPM. But before we get started, I always like to cover, what are project controls? That's something in the industry that I think, we all hear this name, we hear this title, and we wonder, we think we know what project controls is, but to drill it down to what it really is, it's trying to control project outcomes and utilizing the data that you have at your disposal to do that. And the reason you want to do that is to predict and understand and influence the outcome of the job. I think we all know that the industry has some metrics that we're not all proud of in terms of delay and cost overruns. What I saw in the industry was a lot of disputes at first. Tried to get more on the front end of that and trying to avoid disputes, but we all know that when money's, when it costs more money and it takes more time, that costs more money, and who ends up paying that? If we can get ahead of that problem, control project outcomes, I think there's a lot less stress in the industry. I think there's a lot happier people out there building, and customers and clients of those construction companies are ultimately happy as well because it aligns with their, interests. But one of the most interesting things I've dug into over the years was trying to figure out, well, how rampant is project controls in the industry? If it's something that's so useful that I believe in, why do we keep seeing some of these statistics where they're at? 80% of projects are delayed and over budget. The claims numbers are very high. It doesn't seem like an industry that's running optimally, and I wanted to understand why. And if you dig into it, you'll see, there may be companies out there that, analyze some data, capture it, try to understand it. But if you sort of piece it all together and realize that only 5% of the companies out there actually have project controls teams, it starts to piece together some of this problem. And given the time constraints and the budget constraints, it makes it very hard to find resources to make sense of all this information, to make good use of it, to ultimately result in better outcomes. So that's what project controls is. Those are some of the challenges we're up against. There's 5% of companies are mostly in the E&R 400 too. So if you think about the broader industry, if you think about, small to medium-sized contractors, they don't have the resources available or the funds available, which puts them even more at risk when time takes too long and costs result in higher than originally planned, which puts them at risk of, ultimately going out of business. So that's, my thesis is that if we got better at analytics more frequently, there would be a much better outcome. And I think that that's what we want to talk about today, is how is Procore focused on that? How is SmartPM focused on that? And why do we see so much value in the scheduled data itself? So why, I'll answer the first question, is why is scheduled data a fundamental part of project controls? Why did I seem to think every single project that I got involved in, hey, it says attendees are on. Oh, my apologies. I think that we're having some technical difficulties. Is everybody there and can hear me now?
Yes, now I can.
Yes, now I can.
All right, all right. I'll go back here and I'll just do a quick download again of what are project controls and why are they useful. Project controls, if you dig through the internet and come up with a definition, to me it's taking data and making your best use of that information, and doing it in a manner that allows you to constructively influence the outcome on a project. And I think we all want to get projects done on time and on budget, but the statistics out there say that we're challenged as an industry in achieving that. And there's many different reasons for it. Number one, construction's hard. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that need to happen. A lot of schedules are built with best case scenarios in mind, as are budgets, and we all know that a lot of risk needs to be sort of consumed from the contractor side when competitively bidding. But another interesting fact is most companies don't have a project controls team or department. They do some sort of level of controlling outcomes through understanding data, but when you cross-reference that with the reality that budgets are cut as tight as possible, and as are timelines, and only 5% of the industry actually have people that are dedicated to that effort of capturing and understanding data to influence outcomes, one would think that that would result in outcomes that we see. So most of these companies are E&R. There's a whole slew of thousands of other GCs, mid-market, small to medium-sized businesses that do not have this ability, which to me is a larger risk, because they are much more apt to having to go out of business when they have a bad year or a bad project. A single project can derail an entire company. So this to me is a problem, but there are solutions today. That's what we're going to talk about. How is Procore capturing this information and leveraging data to support a better outcome, especially in their scheduling world, their scheduling part of the product, and as well as what do we do, and why do we believe that schedule is a very important piece to the overall equation. And what we'll talk about today is why and how do you take this process that exists that we know has been challenged over the years, and how do you right that ship using technology. First and foremost, we'll talk a little bit about why schedule. Why a lot of people out there denounce scheduling. People don't want to build schedules. They don't want to update schedules. I think there's many reasons for it. It usually becomes a very painful point in conversations, is trying to understand the schedules outline that we've seen today. But also the process has been a little bit up and down over the years in terms of who knows how to build a good schedule, who follows best practices, what happens when you don't follow best practices, and why is this specific data set so important towards analyzing projects. I found that in my experience as an analyst, whenever I got involved in any project, whether it was a review of a project that took too long and cost too much money, or a project that seemed to be headed down a bad path, or even a project that was getting going, the first place I ever went was the schedule data. It told me the most I needed to know about a project in the least amount of time. And I'm not talking about a little bit of time, I'm still talking about a lot of time. But it also came with enough data to understand how everything fits together into one systematic whole. So if you think about a schedule, it's got activities and logic. It's the only data set that connects every activity into one systematic whole. That starts at the beginning of the job, has a ton of things that need to happen that are interrelated, and ultimately, leads up into an end date, and then also deciphers paths that are in, high priority or critical or near critical, versus things that are, have room for delay without actually impacting the end date, which is where, a lot of costs come in. It's also something that was available on most projects. So this process was embraced back in the late 70s, early 80s. It was now probably on 99% of projects that are commercial. It's also a process that gives us key snapshots over time. It's the only thing that shows you a time component and shows where everything fits in over time, but it also gives you the ability to understand at different points in time what has changed or what sort of priorities have shifted due to the structure of the plan and the performance to date. It also gives us the ability to take performance history and understand, what that means for the future. When you first build that baseline and you first build that cost budget, things happen. That's all based on experience. It's all based on what we think will happen. And then there's what actually happens and how does that translate into, inefficiencies or waste or cost. And that's really the last point is, what I learned was the schedule will enable you to see the writing on the wall for future overruns in terms of cost and not the other way around. The cost will not drive the schedule will drive the cost. One's a leading indicator and one's a lagging indicator. And if most people are concerned with cost, but they don't understand that in order to understand truly what's driving cost, we need to then thoroughly understand the data and the schedule. And if we're not doing that, we've got this cost structure that doesn't have this, logic built in of what impacts what over time. And we can't really decipher with too much certainty what are our risk issues that will ultimately continue to drive up costs without actually studying and deeply understanding the schedule data. Now, I'll be the first to let you know that, having spent as much time in this industry, working with contractors, working with owners, working with subs, the process that was granted to the industry through CPM scheduling was a good one, a very good one if managed well. The programs that were created, to manage schedules or create these CPM schedules are powerful if they're managed appropriately using best practices. But what I've seen is that's not common. It's not common to see schedules that are built utilizing best practices. And if they're so useful in decision making and managing and they're not utilizing best practices, they will ultimately derail your job. If you're following them as a tool that is supposed to help you manage a job and you're making decisions based on, prioritization of resources related to float and criticality, and you're not building out all the logic or following, the right processes that are deemed best practices, you're actually setting yourself up to rely on something that's going to mislead you. And that's really where, the crux of the issue is building good quality schedules and then following best practices through the updating. But then the following piece is studying that performance data and utilizing it to make better decisions. And even in the day-to-day versus the overall master planning cycle, there's some breakdowns. And Primavera and Microsoft and similar products didn't come with a user's manual on how to do this process well. They built the tool in alignment with what works if you know how to work it. So what we've done, Procore as well as SmartPM, is built add-on capabilities to get the most out of this process. One from a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, and that would be Procore, and then us from a week-to-week, month-to-month basis of analyzing the data as we capture it and understand it to actually result in better conversations and better understanding and better decision-making along the way. So we'll jump into that right now and tell you a little bit about how did we approach this process, how did we add on to the existing process, which is a good one if managed well, but how do we formulate our technologies to ultimately leverage a process that works, but ensure that it works well. And I'll let Matt jump in real quick and talk a little bit about that in a second. But I will also talk about, project controls and the evolution thereof. We talked about what are project controls, but you'll see that, when doing the research and understanding what technologies or what processes were created, we see a history here. when did scheduling really start? The Gantt chart was first brought to the construction industry in the early 1900s. That generally started to enable people to lay out a plan, and these Gantt charts started to follow a process of putting in order through perceived logic. But in the 1950s, people came along with a mathematical way to calculate float and criticality using the critical path method scheduling and PERT analyses, which enabled people to then update the data and recalculate the plan. So it wasn't just on a sheet of paper, it was in a computer that was capturing progress and performance data from the field and recalculating these total float values and readjusting the start dates and finish dates in the future based on performance history, and then highlighting our new priority paths, because the truth was the plan that you laid out in the beginning wasn't what actually happened, because there's so many different moving parts. But what we lost in that process was understanding where are we at today based on where we originally wanted to go, and that's why CPM was built. And that worked. That worked well, but it required a lot of different people involved. These were our early project controls professionals. Eventually, this technology was brought to the mainstream via the desktop computer, and that was in the late 70s, early 80s, when Primavera and Microsoft Project were first brought to the world. And this was handed off to the industry, as I mentioned before, not necessarily with a instruction manual on how to do it well, but everything that it needed to have to actually mirror this CPM process was now available at your fingertips. And 40 years later, we're realizing that a lot of best practices have gone to the wayside, but we'll get into that a little bit. Eventually, the integration of the total cost management system was invented in the late 80s. And then building information modeling was invented around 2000, early 2000. So now we've got schedule, cost, and visual that can be aligned. That's the holy grail, right? And that's one thing that we are working on today, is how do we make that simple? How do we take these three areas, cost, schedule, as well as what are we talking about in the schedule, and even layering in resources to get the most out of this process to effectively make decisions along the way. But I'll let Matt jump into where his involvement in this project controls evolution came into place with the next major innovation in construction management.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Procore, obviously that introduction of internet connectivity on the job site was huge. Both for the digitization of data for our customers, right, but also just the ability to have mobile tools that people have at their fingertips out on a job site, right? So, as you kind of get into that 2010s, 2007, the introduction of the iPhone, 2011, the introduction of the iPad, right? That's really where Procore starts to really build some momentum around digitizing these processes, right, and bringing that data into a central kind of platform. And then as we move forward and work with partners like SmartPM, it's how do we connect the dots for all of these processes to the schedule to help with just better project control management, right? Better risk mitigation and identifying problems, before they're problems. And that kind of moves us, into kind of where we are today, right? And and the AI ML sort of onslaught that has made it to the mainstream, this year and last year, right? With Chat GPT and different things, and that technology is only going to make us, accelerate the pace of innovation and our ability to identify those risks and help our customers, better manage those projects.
Exactly, and that's the thing for us at SmartPM. Having spent as much time as we did understanding, what can you do with this information, and how can you leverage it to effectively understand the writing on the wall on a project or see the forest through the trees, and knowing that the schedule data was so useful even on its own, we started to use cloud-based technology and supercomputer abilities in the cloud to calculate things that we just couldn't do on our computers. And then the other aspect of that is how do you broadcast it out in a meaningful way, such that people who don't schedule for a living can understand it and make good decisions based on it. And we all know, I'm sure a lot of people on this call our schedulers, our project controls people, who have spent probably 20 plus years taking information and communicating it as effectively as they could. But what I'm sure you all realize is trying to do it as manually or on your computer with spreadsheets and whatnot, or even on paper like I used to do. It's a time-consuming process, and then trying to then communicate that to the right parties in an effective way that good collaboration can result. Didn't start happening until recently, probably around 2010-ish. I think Acumen Fuse was the first product. Claim Digger was before that, but there was still a lot of, experience necessary to understand that information, and then bubbling it up in a manner that, say, an executive or a site team could understand and collaborate on, or an owner could take and understand what this really means for the future of the job and start to pinpoint risk issues was something that was necessary. And then to be able to broadcast that and put it, out to reports required more than just an individual. First of all, an individual or a team of individuals taking all that time to do it manually is costly. But then trying to get them to communicate that in a meaningful way such that it does effectively move the needle on the project was a challenge in and of itself. And that's what we started working on. But if you kind of look at this picture and sit back, you'll see, these arrows are getting closer, and the technologies are getting much more robust, and the intelligence of the industry is only going to get better. And that's going to happen, much, much quicker than it did in say, the 20th century. So yeah, AI, machine learning is very exciting. It's interesting to see what you can do with generative AI. It's interesting to see what you can do with AI in general, on the back end of even our system, things that we're working on to do subcontractor analytics. So cool stuff in the future here. And yeah, I think we are at a very pivotal point in time where the technology capabilities and the digitization of that information and all the data that we have access to and all the capabilities that these technologies can do is right for coming up with ways to effectively manage and consistently manage on time and on budget. So I think the next decade's going to be monumental for construction based on where we're at today. Another little bit of information, looking at a schedule file. I know that we've all looked at, the Gantt charts. Some of us have probably seen 100 pages of Gantt charts. Sometimes people will try to roll it up, but it was very difficult to take that information and not having a login and not having a lot of time to dig into that data, or not having that experience, or trying to do it as best as you can on 20 projects as a very experienced master scheduler. It just didn't add up. But if you do have the time and you do have the experience and you do spend a lot of time in the industry, you realize that there's a lot of good, solid information that you can get from this data set that actually helps you, have better outcomes. Resource management's one thing, that's where you look at the total flow. That's where you look at the criticality. That's where you study the logic and determine over time what are going to be my low-hanging fruit issues to start making sure I have enough resources come hell or high water to get done on that date. Looking at project performance, plenty of data in these files to be able to look at that. At a higher level, plenty of data in these files to study subcontractor performance and predictive risk. Plenty of data in these files to study delay, to study critical path delay or concurrent delay or delay to specific milestones. It's just not able to be done in the human head. It's looking at those files or even logging into a live data set in, say, a Primavera or Microsoft project. Managing subcontractor claims and inefficiency claims is useful from this data set. Getting intelligence across your entire business, looking at 10 projects side by side and studying, issues that seem to be rampant that are causing, collective overruns across multiple jobs will help you get key insights to what sort of practices do we need to teach internally. Doing benchmarking your own projects against each other, your own managers against each other, or doing benchmarking against yourself and your peers, and then building out that, what areas can we improve on to be a better outfit is all information that you can get from this information. So just giving you a lot, what's hidden under this file set. What can you do with this data once you have the ability and time, which is what technology creates. I'm going to let Matt talk a little bit now about how does Procore attack this problem. And I'll also, talk about it a little bit about SmartPM, and we'll get into some use cases and procedures that we want to follow. But one thing I will say is, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. We'll answer those at the end as best as we can. If there's a bunch of them that we can't get to, what we typically do is we follow up with a, answering all of those questions and send that out to all the attendees of the meeting. But Matt, why don't you kick it off and tell us a little bit about how Procore is leveraging this existing process and empowering users to do it better.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so in Procore, we support the ability to import a number of different schedule files from different, third parties, right? P6, Microsoft Project, Asta, as well as, there's partners out there like Outbuild who push schedules into Procore, right? So we get that data in, and then there's a number of things you can do with that, right? I'll start at the top left. We have notifications that you can send out. And these are things like you can configure weekly notifications for people to get an email if there's an upcoming task, that's assigned to them or their resource. You can have notifications that go out anytime the schedule changes, right? A new schedule is uploaded. And so that's just a way to set up automated notifications that people receive to keep people abreast of what's happening, right? As opposed to, okay, we've got a new schedule, now I have to go, create an email, add a bunch of people to a distribution list and send that out manually, right? So it sort of automates a lot of that stakeholder management and communication. We'll go clockwise, right? So we've got, partner integrations like SmartPM, right? Who are leveraging that imported schedule to provide value to you through analytics. We have other partners that do, lean tools and scheduling, right? So, really making that data available to the marketplace and allowing, partners that solve, very key problems for our customers and empowering them to be able to do that. Keeping going, we have a look aheads feature. It's a pretty simple, 1 to 6 week look ahead where you can take that imported schedule and break that out with a layer of detail underneath. So, again, more for coordinating and planning the work on site with trades. We have a change request feature where you can log changes. We want to update this, this task pushed out. So we want to document the request to update that schedule task, right? And then you can use a report of all of those requests to then go through P6 or project to make those updates. So there's a change request flow where you have that history of, why changes were requested, who requested them, when they were requested, all logged in Procore and reportable. We have a mobile application where people can access the imported schedule, tasks and activities from the mobile app and filter that by their resource, right? And look at, today's activities, this week's activities. So again, just bringing access to that information out into the field. And last but not least, right, is with Procore, it's an unlimited user model, right? So, once that schedule's in, you can control permissions, and as long as they're, added to your directory and added to the project in Procore, as many people as you need to have access to that schedule or to look ahead, you can grant them access. So, rather than needing additional licenses of another software, right, the entire team, internal folks as well as your collaborators will have access to see that data in Procore. A lot of opportunity to be using that data, streamlining some of these processes. But really, that's ultimately where SmartPM comes in, is their ability to take that data and just really break it down and give you a lot of powerful tools to analyze that. So I'll kick it back to you, Mike, to go over that.
Yeah, before I get there, I just want to just give my thoughts on what are the pain points that Procore is solving here, because there's many. As a person who has been in the industry, we'll start with, unlimited users, right? That was a big issue. Was scheduler creates a schedule because that's the guy, that's the person, the guy or girl who has the license is putting together a plan, and traditionally it was handed out, in paper format. And that was just to minimize the cost exposure to a company to have to buy licenses for everybody. Being able to navigate a schedule is way different than being able to just look at a stack of paper and flip through them. So that's number one, is giving visibility at a reasonable cost as part of your project management platform, that getting more eyeballs on it that can navigate and understand, dig into, sort, filter, all of that is, that's a value right there. Doing that in a mobile format with notifications, it keeps you up to date. It makes it so you can access it from anywhere, and you know what's coming up when you're notified. One of the more important ones that I like is the look ahead feature. One of the biggest breakdowns that I saw out there was when a master schedule got created that was being updated and it got sent to the field. Once you start involving your PMs and supers, you've got a scheduler or a plan that you've agreed to that was built, hopefully using best practices. When it goes out to the field, sometimes that high level master plan that really embodies that process, that critical path method process that's valuable in and of itself, can fall apart when, some of the people who are closer to the project and want to use it as a management tool on their own, start to make changes to it to, break activities up or, move them around, more focused on the day-to-day instead of the week-to-week or the month-to-month. The critical path method process was, not necessarily designed to do a detailed plan on the fly for what's happening day-to-day, more of an overall, how would we put this thing together and in what order makes sense to get maximum efficiency. So they sort of play against each other. Procore sits in the middle of that. You can load that master plan that's been understood and discussed and useful in doing what it does best, and that's getting to a high level view that functions based on these updates. But once you get down to the detail level, it becomes a little different. And when you try to use that program to do both, it generally falls apart. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the supers aren't necessarily thinking about best practices as they add that detail. They're not necessarily aligning the overall duration of their day-to-day with the overall duration that it states in the schedule file itself. So I'm a huge fan of breaking that into two processes. Number one, the master planning and updating process, and number two, the look ahead and detailing out plan for what's really happening in the field, and then merging those two worlds together. And not to mention, by doing that and capturing that information in the near term, it serves as a very meaningful feature for getting accurate information in terms of updating. And it also really aligns with lean. It's not the sticky tabs on the walls and the pull planning, but it is capturing what's going on day for day, what should be going on, what's actually going on, and how can we take that information and understand any variances that we see to really key in on issues in terms of subcontractor performance. And then the change request management piece is another very interesting one. One other big problem that I see is, most of the time when people are managing with that master plan, and they update the schedule on a monthly basis, usually what happens is you lose some time, right? The dates push out. That happens probably 80% of the time. The critical path or the near critical path wasn't necessarily managed day to day as effectively as the plan was. And the result was that there was delay when we updated the schedule, and the knee-jerk response is typically to get that end date back in. And the only way to do that is to make changes to the plan. And the other thing that happens is things change on the fly in the field, and we need to have some sort of understanding of reality built in. And that's where Procore comes in to allow the people in the field to adjust the plan and also be able to give these recommendations from the people who are actually building the job, as opposed to somebody who receives a bunch of update information and has a quick turnaround and that doesn't necessarily have the time to sit there with the field or does have the time and doesn't have the time to test whether or not these changes are reasonable. So having that, this look ahead process and this change request process, I think is definitely a value add, all around. So I'm a huge fan of how Procore has approached this. What do we do? Yeah, we're one of those plugins. We've got these. We're a partner with Procore. We do a little bit different, right? One of the things that I found was, the CPM process is a good one. It just didn't come with directions on, number one, how to build a good schedule. There's many different analytics that you can get from the data from the schedule file itself to determine whether or not you're following best practices. And some of those best practices revolve around types of logic, frequency thereof. Some of it's, the frequency of certain types of constraints, whether they're start constraints, finish constraints, the duration, what sort of durations are we putting in here? Are they large durations, which will come with a need to have controls around progress tracking, versus shorter durations where it's easier to actually calculate out, true progress in a meaningful way so that the schedule can adjust and the criticality can be relied upon, or if there's missing logic. There's a test out there called the DCMA 14, which is pretty much the standard minimum viable quality gauge, which isn't necessarily understood by everybody, but there's more like 35 different metrics that you can quantify. The thing about the DCMA that's challenging is that it's 14-point check with thresholds for each that and it essentially is broadcasted around all project types. But the reality is, if you really think about it, different metrics can have different risk values and thresholds based on project type or size or location, or even just the way in which an organization manages their business. So we've created a quality rubric that's customizable with 35 different things to track against, which systematizes the way in which an organization can view and understand whether or not the schedule is built using the best practices that they believe in for the project types that they believe in. So that's number one, is giving a systematic way and making it very easy to understand. If you get a B-, it's like not perfect, it's pretty good. It's not an A, and there may be some risks. If you have an F, that means you pretty much have to redo your whole schedule. And we highlight the areas for which you are failing in those categories that you've assigned as part of that rubric. So our first goal here was to provide a meaningful way for an organization to determine what constitutes a quality schedule for their type of project. And they can have multiple rubrics for different types of projects. And two, to make sure that the people who are managing the schedule or making changes to the schedule or building the schedule can see where they may have fallen short in the quality category and correct that in a meaningful way. And this is great for, number one, schedulers and project controls people to double check their work. Building a 5,000 activity schedule, you're going to miss a few things. It's like spell check. But then it's also been useful in training, non-schedulers or PMs and supers, what the organization believes needs to be required here to conform to their quality standards, and then to quickly fix that. And it, number one, serves as a checks and balances, and number two, serves as a training tool. What we found with a lot of the people we work with, the PMs and supers are becoming very, very good schedulers, and the outcomes are much, much better when they do. As you load updates in, there's a couple different things that we look at. We're looking at changes, we're looking at compression, feasibility, we're looking at variances, and we're rolling that into automated reports. Reports that take that Gantt chart out of the equation and put it into a vantage point that allows you to see the writing on the wall and the forest through the trees as it relates to the actual project. We do that through trends. We do that through, subcontractor reports, subcontractor performance reports, should have started, should have finished reports, delay reports, quality reports, many different reports that can come out here, and we can automatically send those as soon as the schedule is loaded. So it creates the ability for various people to communicate, whether it's the site teams to executives or project controls, or it's the site teams to their subs, or if it's, the construction company to the owner, or even, insurance companies as well. It's just a great way to intuitively understand what all this collective data really means as it relates to the things that matter around performance, progress, delay, feasibility going forward, predictive end dates, and what's happening and what's not that has a that could have a long-term effect on time and budget. We have dashboards, two types. One's an executive dashboard that sort of highlights all your projects and the low-hanging fruit issues related. That's useful for understanding, common pitfalls in your organization that ultimately result in risk to your collective portfolio. We have a project performance dashboard where it pretty much allows you to dig in at a deeper level to a specific project, whether you're looking at various milestones or you're looking at delay to those milestones, or how well the structure leading to that milestone or to the end date has been rolled out best practices, or how we're tracking in performance, if we're in our late date zone or our early date zone, how many activities or tasks we're hitting on time, how many are late, how many aren't getting done. Many different charts that you can dig through to understand this data at a level that a common person, non-scheduler, could in a quick way. We have trend reports that are customizable that you can send out to relay that information. And we also have the ability to dig into the Gantt chart, so broadcast this information to everybody in a manner that allows them to sort, filter, condense, visualize it in a manner that's much easier than what we're used to with stacks of paper and that sort of thing. So a lot of different analytics, taking that data, putting it into terms that are useful, actionable, and can be discussed using the set of truth, and done so in a manner that doesn't take much time. I used to have to build all these manually, and they take a lot of time to do effectively, but building it into the cloud and allowing cloud technology to do the analytical legwork, and then allowing the user to determine how they want to communicate it with a lot of things to choose from, who to share what with, enables, to me, much better understanding and collaboration across the entire organization, such that nothing gets lost, and accountability and collaboration is heightened. And that's really how we approach this process. So it works very much hand in hand with Procore's approach, getting kind of fixing all the day-to-day procedural breakdowns, alongside with having some controls around that process, and being able to understand the data in a different way that's communicatable across stakeholders as well as internally. Matt, I'll let you talk a little bit about how we work together, how we integrate.
Sure, and so we've got a number of partner integrations, and with SmartPM, what you can see in the visual here is an embedded experience where bringing in some of these analytics and some of these reports into what feels like the Procore application. So within the schedule tool, being able to click and see some of these reports directly from Procore, as opposed to needing to switch software. And that's something working on with our partnerships team, right, is bringing some of that data into Procore. So that's something that we're working on, right? The idea being you import that schedule from P6, from Project, or whatever your solution is, into Procore, and you've got the features available that we discussed in Procore, but then SmartPM can bring that data in and make that available to you in Procore, or what feels like within Procore as well in the web app. So it's this really better empowering teams to access this data, to take action and improve the health of their projects, and mitigate that risk, as quickly as possible. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to say is, this is also, and it's done automatically. If you're loading your schedule files into Procore, which, it's good to do. If you're utilizing Procore as a tool, and you're putting in as much data as you can, whether it's dailies, meeting minutes, submittals, all of the information that you're capturing in there is digitizing it. You don't want to have a separate system of record. And by utilizing Procore effectively to manage the process and sort of break up that day-to-day from month-to-month process with the schedule, just loading those files into it is powerful. And we've auto-generated this information based on when that data is loaded into Procore. So it's very seamless. So if you get into the habit of loading your scheduled data into Procore just to even have record of it, our analytics are automatically going at all times and viewable within Procore, as well as if you wanted to log in directly into its SmartPM as well. But I think, you know, what I want to talk about, and I think probably the most meaningful thing that we can provide is what is a good solid process, and how can you leverage these tools to align with that process. You know, like I said, a lot of people will break out scheduling into Microsoft and Primavera, and Procore is utilized to, you know, connect the site and field and align with all the processes that are, you know, out there in construction in a meaningful way, digitize this process. And SmartPM is here to sit on top of the schedule management process to empower users to get much better understanding of this information in meaningful ways. But how do we take these three types of solutions and how do we leverage them in a way that's most effective in the industry to essentially, you know, achieve better outcomes? And that's what we'll talk about. Number one, you know, people have been using P6 and Microsoft Project for, you know, 40+ years. Getting that information built out, the CPM process is powerful if you know how to use it. So number one, you have to have the tool to build the schedule file, but now how do we then leverage these other tools to ensure success? Number one, get that, you build out your schedule, you load it in, you load it into Procore. SmartPM will analyze that schedule file and tell you whether or not you have any best practice breakdowns. Like I said before, building a high quality schedule that aligns with best practice, even with some of the best schedulers out there who've done this for years, a missing logic tie can change everything as it relates to total float calcs and critical path and near critical path, as well as, you know, other practices that can, you know, slip to the wayside. So the first thing you do is you load it in there and you check. We'll talk a little bit more about what's coming on how we can quickly get that quality analysis, but that's number one, is get it in the system, double check the work, do your spell check, you know, understand where you can improve on the structural integrity of that schedule using the SmartPM quality report. The next thing you can do is then you have the schedule in there, you have it broadcast to the entire team. Now it's up to the super and the PMs to think about, okay, we've got this master plan. Let's look at our, you know, next several weeks based on what we've agreed to accomplish in that time, based on our master plan that's tied to the contract. And that's where you can utilize Procore's, you know, 3-week look ahead feature and start to break that process up so you don't mess the integrity of the master plan up, but you can plan out your day-to-day using Procore's functionality. You allow the super to now utilize their understanding of what they have in front of them, what they need to accomplish according to the overall plan that we've agreed to, and what we have here today or over the next several weeks in terms of resources, or what we're supposed to do in the next 6 weeks, and what resources will we need to achieve that, and what sort of day-to-day functionality or day-to-day resource management do we need to accomplish in that time to adhere to that plan, and not overlapping those two, what I believe to be importantly separated processes. And then from there, you perform an update, right? The CPM scheduling process, like we talked about, needs to be updated. So if you want to get that very useful understanding after a couple weeks or month, of where are we at today and what does that mean for the future of the job and what do we need to do to overcome any obstacles that we've had thus far. That's done back in the CPM process, and you can leverage Procore to assist. You know, a lot of people don't have enough time to be walking out every Friday and updating a schedule. But if they're logging that information in of what they're working on every day and what they intended to do to break out, you know, into more detail, you know, where resources were going to be and what they were going to be working on, and that's getting fed back into Procore via the daily reporting process, and maybe even capturing resource numbers, you can start to understand start dates, finish dates, and progress points, and then feed that back into your schedule update. Now, one thing I said here is bi-weekly update. I highly recommend companies out there don't wait a full month. And the reason I tell you that is because if you do wait a full month, that's the most amount of time you can lose in that update period is a month. So say, you know, you've lost that month because something got shifted to the wayside or a piece of material didn't come in, you know, and you waited that whole month, your end date can kick out a month. Number two, if your end date kicks out several weeks, there's so much more you need to think about to right the ship and have to make some, you know, pretty aggressive changes to do so, like shortening durations or stacking trades. And, you know, the longer you wait to determine that there's a problem, the bigger the risk becomes. So, you know, bi-weekly is great, weekly is even better. If you're capturing this data in Procore, you can do this much more effectively than having to walk out to the site, go back and update the plan. And then if you lose a week, it's that much easier to, you know, modify the approach to overcome that change and to solve the problem before it becomes a bigger problem that results in more compression. So I recommend, you know, weekly updates, and we're seeing a lot of our customers move to that model, and it's been very effective. But the play of the information getting detailed out by the super, understanding what's actually happened, relaying that back to the scheduling process more frequently, it's not actually more work. Some may think it is actually more work, but you're not updating as many activities and you're not going off of memory as much, which again starts to mess with the integrity of the information for the update. From there, you know, once you do update that, you can load it back into Procore, do an assessment of progress, subcontractor performance, delays, risk, compression, predicting out end dates for all activities and milestones using some of these reports that are generated through SmartPM. So we're not done yet, right? When you first take that stab at making changes to the schedule, what we want to do is justify if this approach is doable, or if it's resulted in some integrity breaches of the quality of the schedule, or if it's stack specific trades, or if our end dates now are even feasible based on what we've learned so far on performance. And that's where you would run, you know, you'd load it back into Procore, get these reports to understand, you know, what trades need some, you know, discussions, and where do we really need resources, and is this data, this schedule built with enough quality to actually trust it still when you start making all these changes, that now you can get those requests or those informational data points from Procore through the change management feature, and you can make some changes on the fly to right the ship. Are they doable? Are they feasible? Are they presenting other risks in the short and long term? And those are all analytics that you can, you know, glean from SmartPM. At which point you can then make your final decisions, right? If you've got a schedule that's too compressed, or now you realize we've got to work weekends, or, you know, we made all these changes and now we don't trust the critical path, or the critical path that delays that were happening weren't our fault, and we have to have a discussion about it. All of that information's there to then make your final decisions on that update. You can make those final decisions on what's going to be the least risky approach going forward, one that's trustable, and then finally put in your update. And once you do that, then we start with step 2 again. We go back and we wait another week, another 2 weeks. We follow that 3-week look ahead process. We give the supers the ability to do that. We then load in all that as-built data. We update the schedule. We analyze performance. And now this is what project controls is all about. It's creating a repeatable process that sort of cuts through all of the pitfalls that exist in the current process. And that's how you can leverage Procore and SmartPM to achieve that. And Matt, any other additional things you want to talk about here?
No, I mean, I think you covered it. Just answering one question from the Q&A related to this, where the ask was, if they upload the schedule to Procore, right, from OPC, SmartPM is able to pull the schedule out of Procore. They don't need to manually upload it to both systems.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. One time. I'll talk a little bit about, we now have several mutual customers, a lot of E&R customers that are starting to leverage this process. Got a couple of their testimonials here. All this is really telling you is this process that we talk about is working for various companies out there that, have the project controls personnel, but also have those time constraints and are also trying to push this down to the site team in an effective way. So we have got plenty of information that really supports this process in terms of getting, leveraging both to get to that, happy place of, accountability, collaboration that result in better outcomes. But I know we only have a minute left. We'll talk briefly about what's next. But Matt, why don't you give us a download quickly of what's next with this partnership, and obviously we'll go from there.
Yeah. Just a ton of opportunities ahead for us, right? As we sort of look to work together here. And one of the things we're looking and working on towards is, the ability to, like Mike mentioned earlier, we've got that schedule quality analysis that SmartPM can run. And we're looking at, giving a free analysis when you upload that schedule to Procore, so customers can just get exposure. I know there's some questions around, can we look at examples of these reports, right? And this would give you a method to check out those reports and understand the value that SmartPM is offering, even just as a foot in the door. And other areas we're looking at is, how do we look at things like RFIs and submittals and understand the risks that those things present to the schedule, right? And keeping those things aligned to the latest schedule, right? If the schedule shifts, how are we tracking submittals from a procurement perspective, right? So lots of opportunities to just, again, help highlight risk and help people prioritize and draw attention to the items that need the most attention. And just looking for, other ways to partner. SmartPM, y'all have a ton of expertise in scheduling and analytics and looking at these schedules and finding, different sort of nuggets of information. And for Procore, it's like, how do we capitalize and offer that to our customers and work with SmartPM to bring some of those insights and continue to work together as we find, other opportunities as well. So just a ton that we're going to do and able to do. Not enough to get through since we're at 11, but yeah, just excited about working with you and the team and, bringing some more, data to our customers.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on that real quick before we head out of here. Our goal here is to get more data aligned to the schedule. This year, we're going to be getting cost data, resource data. At some point, we're going to be tying more daily reporting data to the actual schedule files themselves in a way that starts to drill down on inefficiencies, overruns, wastes, impact issues, and that sort of thing. And also, we've gotten a lot of feedback from customers that there's got to be a better way to do the procurement process than building out activities in the schedule file that we are now required to try to update accurately. So what we're going to do is we're going to work together to come up with a better way to manage the procurement cycle, the submittal cycle, as well as giving people access and understanding of which RFIs are probably most important to respond to in what order, what sort of materials do we really need to focus on getting ahead of with our submittal process, and maybe removing that whole process from the construction schedule itself, or enabling users to pick and choose how they want to approach that. And then obviously down the road, we want to even leverage correspondence and make sense of that to really, understand issues that impact projects, not only in a singular project, but a portfolio as well as industry wide, so that we can start to understand what typically drives jobs. So a lot coming here, a lot coming with both of these organizations working together. But yeah, if you want to learn more, you can go to the Procore SmartPM integration site and learn a little bit more there. Probably get some good visuals of how these two products work together. But other than that, I guess we ran out of time. We got some questions. We'll definitely follow up and answer these questions. And I really appreciate everybody showing up today. And Matt, I really appreciate the time. I really appreciate the partnership. I'm excited about the future here.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks y'all for letting us know about the audio so we could fix that. So sorry for that tech difficulty, but all good.
Yeah. And thanks for joining.
All right. Thanks y'all.
Yep.
See ya.